Good morning to everyone, and welcome to this Interreg Europe webinar on better regional policies to protect and restore nature within the framework of the EU Green Week. My name is Astrid Severin, and I'm a thematic expert at the Interreg Europe policy learning platform for environment and resource efficiency. I will be the moderator of this webinar, and I will be supported by my colleague Marco Citelli, who is our rapporteur. Please note that this webinar is being recorded. In light of the Biodiversity Strategy and the new State of Nature report that has been issued yesterday, this webinar gives us the possibility to look at successful regional policies for the protection and preservation of European natural heritage and key success factors for their wider deployment. We are honored to have keynote speeches from Mrs. Karin Zaunberger from the European Commission, DG Environment, and Mr. Erik Gerritsen from the Institute of European Environmental Policies. The webinar also provides insights into the link between relevant biodiversity data and conservation decision-making processes from the Interreg Europe project BIDREX. Gerard Bota is here with us. And it showcases tools and methods to improve governance, to achieve broad stakeholder support, and to facilitate multi-stakeholder partnerships at regional level from the BIOGOV project. So hello to Wim Hiemstra as well. Throughout the webinar, participants will have the chance to ask questions in the chat, and towards the end of the webinar, time is reserved for an interactive panel discussion. We hope that you will send us many questions as possible to our distinguished panel. So, to get to know you a little bit better before we are starting, we would like to ask you to briefly answer the following two polls for us. We would like to know what kind of organization you are coming from. If your category is not in there, please write it in the chat. We can only have 5 categories here. Well, I think this is a great result. We have almost 80% from local and regional or national authorities attending here, and NGOs and protected areas as well. So this is actually excellent. We're really happy to have you here and to share all this information with you. The second poll that we would like to launch is about the areas of main interest that you have and why you've joined this webinar. Again, if we have missed out one area, then please let us know in the chat so that we can see that as well. Okay, well, of course, a lot of interest in biodiversity and protected areas, but everything is actually interesting for you. So I think we have a really good mix of information that we can put forward on the protection and restoration of nature today. So with a kind reminder to all speakers to keep to their time, please, I would like to give the word to Karin Zaunberger from the European Commission to present us the new EU Biodiversity Strategy. Thank you, Karin.
Thank you, Astrid. Good morning, colleagues. Thank you for joining this seminar. It's a great pleasure for me to give you a brief overview on the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030, bringing nature back into our lives. This strategy, as you may know, it was adopted in the middle, or I'd say during the COVID-19 pandemics, and it will also be a central element of the EU's recovery plan. We think it will be crucial to prevent and build resilience to future zoonosis outbreaks and to provide immediate business and investment opportunities for restoring the EU's economy. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Now, the EU Biodiversity Strategy is not a standalone initiative. It's one of the initiatives embedded in the European Green Deal, that is the growth strategy of the European Union. This European Green Deal has put protection and restoration of ecosystems in the heart of its mandate, and the protecting nature, restoring nature goes across all the other initiatives as well. Next slide, please. We are facing a global biodiversity crisis. We have heard it on and on. The amount of assessments and studies and assessment reports is accumulating. Now, this particular graphic stems from the IPBES global assessment. IPBES is the intergovernmental platform on biodiversity and ecosystems and their services. And it can be said that we are in the beginning or in the middle of the 6th extinction crisis. And this is the first extinction crisis actually we human beings are causing ourselves. It is not caused by an outer force like a meteorite. We can see that this biodiversity crisis is caused by direct and indirect drivers. And only if we tackle both direct and indirect drivers will we have a chance to address this biodiversity crisis. COVID-19 had also showed that health, biodiversity and climate are interdependent, interwoven, and can only be tackled in an integrated manner. What this graphic shows is that the extinction rate is faster than ever before. So we see, unfortunately, all these negative trends accelerating, which means our efforts in order to halt and reverse biodiversity loss need to be accelerated as well. Next slide. We know that biodiversity underpins sustainable development. Sustainable development will only be possible if we halt and reverse biodiversity loss. Hence, biodiversity loss is a key threat, one of the key threats for humanity. It's also an economic threat. Almost half of the global GDP is linked to nature. Many people do not really associate nature with a must to have. They associate with the nice to have, and yet it's a very important feature. It's a basic feature for our lives and for our economies. These connections between biodiversity loss, climate change and pandemics means that we need integrated solutions, that we need fast and deep transformative change. And it's clear that restoring biodiversity, protecting biodiversity must be a core part of the recovery. On your right, you can see the so-called wedding cakes of the Sustainable Development Goals. Personally, I really like this way of showing the Sustainable Development Goals because it shows that the biosphere is the basic for our societal and economical objectives and endeavors. Next slide, please. Now, why is now the time to take action? For health, there are clear links between the nature destruction and the increased risk of outbreaks of infectious diseases, in particular zoonotic diseases such as the one we are actually experiencing right now. We need a resilient recovery, stimulating jobs and a transformative change post-COVID-19. As now, for the because of the measures that have been taken for COVID-19, there will be millions and millions of people who have lost their jobs, and they need their jobs first. They first want to know how to close the gap until the end of the month before they can think about the end of biodiversity or the end of our civilization. So a resilient recovery, stimulating green jobs, stimulating jobs that contribute to biodiversity protection and conservation are crucial. And then this strategy also reminds us of our role in the world. The world is watching on the European Union for leadership towards a global, but an ambitious, realistic, global post-2020 biodiversity framework. Actually, while we are having this webinar here, without COVID-19, the world would be meeting now in Kunming as we speak in order to negotiate on this post-2020 global biodiversity framework, but everything has been postponed until next year, but work is ongoing. Next slide, please. The elements of the EU Biodiversity Strategy can be summarized in 4 main themes: protect nature, restore nature, enable transformative change, and EU leadership for an ambitious global agenda. And in fact, nature-based solutions, the working with nature for people, can be seen as the red thread amongst all these 4 elements. Next slide, please. First, I'd like to speak a bit about the Protect Nature. That has been a cornerstone of environmental policies, biodiversity policy in EU for decades. We seek to protect 30% of EU land and sea. That's of course based on Natura 2000 and national designated areas. This is an EU-wide target that will take into account specific situations in the member states. And this target shall integrate ecological corridors to build a coherent network. In particular, in a time when climate changes, it's very important that we have a coherent network that is connected. Otherwise, if the network is too fragmented, it will not be resilient enough to stand the impact of climate change. And we'd like to see that a third of these areas will be strictly protected. These are areas that covering a very high biodiversity value, and they're also important for mitigation and adaptation to climate change, including, most importantly, all of primary and old growth forest. All remaining primary and old growth forest in the EU should be protected. Next slide, please. Restoration of nature is another key cornerstone, because we know that, as we've heard already yesterday, that a lot of our nature is not in good health. The State of Nature report is very alarming, yet another alarming report. That means restoring nature is even more so important. That's why in the biodiversity strategy, it includes an EU restoration plan with 2030 commitments, a whole line of it. We want to see legally binding targets to be proposed next year. We want that there's no deterioration of any protected habitat and species by 2030, and the trend should be positive for at least 30% of all. That needs an increase of agroecology and organic farming, an increase of biodiverse landscape features, a reduction of the use and risk of pesticides, a reduction of pollution from fertilizers. And then we want to plant an additional 3 billion trees respecting ecological principles. And we want to reverse the decline in pollinators. Next slide, please.
3 minutes, please.
Sorry? We want to remediate contaminated soil sites. We want to restore 25,000 kilometers of free-flowing rivers. We want to also restore ecosystems in the urban areas. A new urban greening platform, the Green City Accord, shall mobilize and recommend and encourage all city mayors to make greening plans and implement them. We want to halve the number of red species lists that are threatened by invasive alien species, and we'd like to reduce the damage to seabed and damage through bycatch. Next slide, please. Enabling transformative change. As I said before, all these commitments can only be achieved if we manage deep and fast transformative change, a systemic change across society and economy. This needs, therefore, there is a governance framework for biodiversity. It needs to unlocking financing from all different sectors. It cannot be only solved by environment ministries. It really needs the engagement, the full engagement of all the other sectors. It cannot be stemmed by public forces alone. It needs to be public and private. It needs the business engagement. It needs also that people are really aware of the situation, that knowledge and education on all levels, from primary to secondary to tertiary to education of adults, because it's still the case that a great majority of people is not aware of the crisis situation, the planetary emergency we are in. And here we want to promote the use of nature-based solutions. We think through the implementation, scaling up, stepping up the implementation of nature-based solutions that will allow and able to unlock financing, to unlock local potential and unlock the potential on many levels. Next slide. In order to make this transformative change happening. Transformative change is nothing theoretical. Transformative change is something that has to happen now within the next coming years. But this transformative change is actually not a threat. It's really an opportunity for society and for economy. Our biggest challenge here is the time, because we need to manage this transformative change in the next 10 years. Finally, EU's position for the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. We are fully in line with the 2050 goal of the UN vision. It's living in harmony with nature, and also this will only be possible if we'll manage the transformative change. We want to see the world agreeing on ambitious global 2030 goals and targets, and we want an improved means of implementation. That means finance, capacity building, research, know-how, and technology exchange. We want much stronger implementation. The strategic plan and its Aichi targets did not fail because of how they were written, but they were failed because they were not seen as the business of all society, the business of all government, the business of all sector. And we also need a much stronger implementation, monitoring and review in order to hold governments and actors accountable that they achieve the commitments they have made. And we need a fair and equitable share of benefits from the use of genetic resources linked to biodiversity. It means all three objectives of the convention: conservation, restoration, and sustainable use of biodiversity. Equally, the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities need to be respected, and all stakeholders need to be involved. Next slide, please.
Please, one minute, please, Karin.
1 minute. Well, then let's move on. I think I am there. I'm nearly there. Please go to the next slide. They're coming to the next steps. At the moment, now that the strategy has been adopted, we are awaiting the replies from the European Council. There's council conclusions are to be adopted in the next meeting. We hope to have all these measures kind of endorsed by the council, and then so that we can fully work towards the towards the COP15 next year. I'd like to briefly touch on the biodiversity summit that was held in September. You had seen 70 plus governments, heads of states, including our Commission President, endorsed the so-called Leaders' Pledge for Nature, which really puts nature in the heart of our politics. Next slide, please. Here, this is kind of an overview if you want to see the EU Biodiversity Strategy on one slide altogether. And next slide, please. And if you really wanted to see more, I would really encourage all of you to read through this very dense document, and let's work jointly, collectively, to make this biodiversity strategy a reality. Thank you, and sorry to organize if I got a bit astray, a bit too long. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Karin. It's a very fascinating subject, and you're, of course, forgiven to go a little bit over time. So thank you for this inspiring keynote, for pointing at the global crisis that we're having, but most importantly, also pointing at the ambitious targets that have been put forward. Of course, I would encourage everybody to put some questions in the chat to you, but let me please start by asking you, what do you think people should do first? Where should a region start with its biodiversity measures and activities?
Well, I think there's not really a first, but if I had to have a first, I would start in the urban sphere. Many people live, more and more people live in cities, and it's there in the urban where you can see changes very fast if you enter into implementation. And as we are living through COVID-19, actually COVID-19 has really showed how important it is to have green spaces in the city. So by increasing green spaces, green roofs, green walls, we contribute to climate change mitigation, adaptation, to biodiversity protection, and we make a huge contribution to human health, which will increase our resilience. So I think I would probably start there, but actually at the same time, because the living in the city is not limited to the city. I mean, for the clean water of the city, it means protecting, for example, the watersheds around it, and the so I think it's also in our food, in our the way how we produce and consume food is another area which really links to everybody. Health and food, this is a prime interest of every citizen. So I think here is where you can involve all citizens to make their share. It's the choice of our food we make, which has a big impact, and all these small impacts come together. And then thirdly, whenever there are elections, I think people need to vote, and it's important to make sure that people who are aware, who understand the seriousness of the crisis we are in, that those people get into decision-making positions. So vote, urban and food, I think that would be my three, no, not only one, three priorities.
Well, thank you very much. I think that that is a very good approach for everybody to see. As you were pointing out rightly, we have seen how important this is during the crisis, and it is a very good point to tackle in urban areas, so that people are not all cramped in the same park, and that we have more space we can use. I also had another question. I remember from last year, November, we had a workshop still with people being on one side together discussing about ecosystems, especially in an urban context. And your colleagues have been telling me that there is a lot of funding available actually, but that the funding is not being used yet very well by the regions. And you also had the point of unlocking funding in your presentation. So I'm wondering, is that still the same situation? And can the regions go to use some funding for biodiversity measures or nature measures?
I really like to think it's getting better, and I think the core remedy of this is really, again, information and communication. Very often, as we've also identified during the meeting you are mentioning, is that people are simply not aware that these funds exist and they can be used in this manner. For example, when it comes to flood protection, those authorities who are in charge of it very often first think of the hard measure, the grey measures they've always done. So they really need to widen the scope to see that sometimes you have green, hybrid, or grey measures. You need the whole bouquet. And I think best remedy of all that is communication, communication, communication. Because the bottleneck are those organizations who are actually in the relay between the funds and where the funds are implemented. So the funds are there, the solutions are there, the people who want it are there, but the connection point, that's where the problem lies. And that's here we need still improved communication. We try to do our parts in providing guidance, but then the best guidance is of no use if nobody uses it. So we need to be better in communicating that all these guidance do exist. So communication, and also in the next, as now we have, I talked about the European Green Deal as being the overarching framework. I mean, that of course, in terms of from EU, let's say EU politics really has been a 180% change. I mean, protection and restoration of biodiversity has never been so much in the heart of the policy made. Maybe last time it was like this was in the 19th towards the Earth Summit in Rio. So this is really, really an opportunity. And as we have also the challenge, I mean, the next inundations and droughts, they will be coming. That's kind of in all the uncertainties, as said, certainty, so we need to get prepared. We can no longer wait.
Thank you very much. We totally agree with you. So also this webinar is one of the points where we are trying to communicate more. And at the end of the webinar, we will play a little video about what we can do as policy learning platform for regions. So especially we have, for example, a help desk if you want to know more about how to reach out for funding or what funding sources are there. We can help you to answer these questions, and you can send them to us. So thank you very much, Karin, for your presentation, for answering these questions. And I hope later people will also have more questions to you. So I go with this to our next speaker. I'm really happy also to say hello to Erik Gerritsen from the Institute of European Environmental Policy, and you will speak to us about building back better with nature. So thank you, Erik.
Thank you, Astrid. I'm now unmuted. I hope you can all hear me. So yeah, my name is Erik Gerritsen. I work for the Institute for European Environmental Policy. It's a sustainability think tank. I'm from the Netherlands, originally from the region of Overijssel, but I've been in Brussels for 11 years working on biodiversity. Just trying to get the presentation visible for myself as well. Yeah. So as Astrid said, I'll be talking to you about building back better with nature using regional policy. I will first give a short introduction on nature protection and restoration in the EU and the role of regional policy. Then I will zoom in a little bit on what we're currently spending through EU regional policy and investment needs for the future. Then I will talk a little bit about how regional authorities can concretely nature-proof their policy plans and operational programs. And if I have time left, I'll show you one inspiring example. But if I will not have time, there will be two very interesting cases presented after me. So just one quick thing to say on protection and restoration. I think it's important to keep in mind that some ecosystems can bounce back quickly once they're degraded. For example, here you see a river system. This is in the United States, where actually beavers were allowed to build dams in the river, which kept it wet during recent forest fires. So actually, this helped to maintain biodiversity in the valleys, and it helps for the rest of the landscapes to recover very quickly. And also in Europe, we've seen quite some spectacular restoration of river ecosystems, but there's still a lot of work to do. On the other hand, some ecosystems really take ages to restore once degraded. But this is an example from Ireland. It's just a few weeks ago, where the combination of extreme weather and spruce plantation on a raised bog caused this very large bog slide to happen. So you see actually the pine trees sliding into the bog. And these raised bog ecosystems, they really take centuries to grow. So just an event like this, because of poor planning, really takes a long time to restore. So why am I saying this is because, as Karin explained, there's new ambition on restoration, and rightly so. But I want to make the point that in every case, it is better to prevent the degradation in the first place. And for that, as also mentioned, the protected areas are critical. And we're lucky in Europe because 26% of our territory is designated as a protected area. So we're actually already close to the 30% target, which is in the new strategy. And it's certainly not some places that are only far away in the countryside. Karin mentioned the importance of cities. There are many sites in or next to cities as well. And of this 26% of Europe, 18% is designated for habitats and species that are protected EU-wide under the EU nature directives. And together, that's the Natura 2000 network. I hope most of you are familiar with it, but it's more than 27,000 sites across the EU. and you could say that they really host the most precious biodiversity we have. So ecologically speaking, they are really the backbone of our development. But there are many big challenges, and you've maybe seen the State of Nature report, which was presented yesterday. Still a lot of challenges, both in the Natura 2000 side as well as outside. So IEEP has been working for many years on the implementation of an EU nature policy, and just 2 years ago we published a study for the European Commission where we looked for the first time looked at successes in implementation of the nature directives, because there's a lot of these gloomy assessments, but when you look closer, there are many success stories, at regional level. So we looked at these so-called measure-driven improvements and tried to identify what are the success factors behind them. And you see a whole list here. You don't need to read all of them, but they include many of the things we're also talking about today. And I think all of them, that's the point I want to make, can be supported through European regional policy. And I just want to highlight one, since we're in the Interreg Europe webinar today, is that interregional cooperation was one of the success factors where people look beyond their sites and beyond their own neighborhood and work together across borders to solve nature problems, since nature does not respect our administrative borders. So, for this, I want to just highlight another study we contributed to, which came out this year only, so more recent, where we looked specifically in the use of Interreg to support the implementation of Natura 2000 and also biodiversity outside. So this report, which we will share after the webinar, will, summarize 18. We found 20 projects that we listed here in the report, which are very inspiring, and there are 18 more detailed case studies, and just really shows how important already the implementation of regional policy and investment is for nature and biodiversity in the EU. So I hope this can really inspire you to do more different things. So then I wanted to just show you how much we're actually already investing in environmental objects, and particularly in nature and biodiversity Europe-wide. So here you can see the Commission's tracking of biodiversity spending. And in yellow, you see planned investments, in light green, decided investment, and in dark green, actually spent money, regional funding. So I just wanted to highlight those two categories. The first, the higher one highlighted is biodiversity, nature protection, and green infrastructure outside of Natura 2000, and the other is inside of Natura 2000. And it's, I think I mainly wanted to point out that there's quite a big difference in the actual decided investment between the two. So where outside of Natura, we're almost on target. Inside of Natura 2000, we're not even halfway of what we plan to invest. And I think that's an important message I want to give, is to do not forget Natura 2000 implementation. Then I wanted to look a bit to the future. So what are the nature investment needs for the next years, implementing also this EU Biodiversity Strategy to 2030? And the strategy itself, it estimates that we need at least 20 billion a year for investment in nature. And where we are currently involved in as IEP is to evaluate so-called prioritized action frameworks. These are documents prepared by member state authorities, identifying priority investment needs in nature and biodiversity. So it's not only Natura 2000, but it's also looks beyond that green infrastructure investments. So and it shows that for the next EU financial framework, so 2021-2027, we need 8.8 billion euros of investment, of which 3 billion one-off investments for which regional policy is most appropriate. So there is also a need for 1.8 billion for green infrastructure. And when you look at the real growth in Natura 2000 investment needs, it's about 38% higher than in the previous estimate. And what we also found—
3 minutes, yeah. 3 minutes, please.
Oh, okay, I'll speed up. What we also found is that currently regional funding covers about 22% of EU co-funding for Natura 2000, but the differences are very large between EU member states. So to make a long story short, there is a real big investment need, bigger than we maybe probably had estimated, now that we know more concretely what is needed. And there's a really big potential in many member states to use regional investment much more strategically. So people ask us, is nature still eligible under regional funding for the next period? Yes. This here you see the priority objectives, and one is very much focused on environment, and within it there is a specific objective on enhancing biodiversity, green infrastructure in the urban environment, and reducing pollution. And implementing authorities, they must take into account the needs for nature and biodiversity that are prioritized in these prioritized action frameworks. So, but the progress on actual spending will be measured just by how much area of Natura 2000 is covered by funding. And that, of course, will miss a lot of key information on actual biodiversity outcomes. For example, in trends of habitat quality or species numbers. So it is really, really critical, and that's one of my key messages today, is that in operational planning of regional and local authorities, it is very important to be very specific and smart what you want to invest in, how you're going to select project, how you're going to monitor progress. Otherwise, it will be difficult to assess effectiveness of investment. So, so to help you, I want to just bring your attention to guidance we did on so-called biodiversity proofing EU funding programs, and in which we also developed a specific guidance for cohesion policy funding. So this is, of course, for the previous funding period, financial framework, but it's still very relevant today. This is a very impressive slide, but this is just one of the graphs that you will find in the report, which explains you in which different periods in the policy cycle and the implementation cycle of projects you can step in to make projects deliver more and better. To deliver regional policy more and better for biodiversity. I would really recommend you to, when you're now planning for the next period, to go through this. I focused a lot on the Natura 2000, but of course, as Karin said as well, find win-wins with other societal objectives to really have impact at scale. And this is another graph from the report biodiversity proofing guidance, where that can help you to find co-benefits with tourism, with health, and with climate adaptation.
Okay.
And there are many other sources, but I will not talk about them. But there's a question and answer after, so I can clarify some more, and we can share this after the meeting. That's it, I think. Thank you very much. The example maybe later. Thanks.
So thank you very much, Erik. Sorry, when you start seeing me, then it's really already high time to conclude. And but it's a lot of very important information. Thank you so much for sharing that and for sharing also all the guidance documents. I think that will be great inspiration for the people attending here. We will of course share everything in the chat, not almost everything, and a lot of information in the follow-up article that we are doing. So again, if you want to send us in some questions, that would be very good. But let me please start by saying, okay, you pointed out that nature is still eligible in the coming programming period, which is excellent news. So thank you very much. But my question to you would also be a little bit similar than the one to Karin. What do you think is coming first? You have been saying, okay, is it protection or is it restoration? We have seen that there is still lacking a little bit in the Natura 2000 sites investments. So what would you say?
So yeah, I think I would follow the EU Biodiversity Strategy to 2030, which clearly makes a choice for both. We cannot choose protection over restoration. But yeah, my key point I wanted to make is that, of course, there's definitely a very urgent need in cities for green spaces. But the reality is also that we're not going to solve the biodiversity crisis there. So we have to do it, but we also need to check back at those real functional ecosystems outside of cities and around cities, some of which are protected and where we are actually where we did not meet also goals for protection, also in the, for example, the last 2 10-year strategies that we had at EU level. So so I would say both, but don't forget nature protection.
Thank you. My second question would be regarding the smart operational planning that you have been pointing out and underlying in red. That is very important. I'm working a lot in the waste management and circular economy world. So regions would have a waste management plan, and is that the same for nature protection and restoration? Is that something each region should have?
Well, in a way we do. I mean, many regions do, but it depends very much on the country. And there, I think also Interreg can really help still to share experiences. But I think what I want to convey is that a lot of information about what should be priorities for nature and biodiversity are already made explicit in many places. For example, in Natura 2000 or other protected area site management plans, in river basin management plans, in programs of measures under nature and under water policy, marine policy, and also, but there are also places in Europe where these things are not very made explicit yet. So I think there is, and there are also regional policy can help to speed up the setting of basic conservation objectives and measures, and prepare these management plans, which will really help to be concrete about the implementation, and also it will help integration with these other objectives you mentioned. So yeah.
Well, thank you very much for pointing this out. Also, you have underlined there should be a lot of interregional learning. It's a good opportunity to use Interreg and the Interreg policy learning platform to this end. So to our participants here, please do not hesitate to contact us if you need to have inspiration, and we have a lot of services we can offer to help you to bring this up to speed and to work with even more strength and speed in that area. So you underlined, Erik, that the success factors, some of the success factors are monitoring, evaluation, and also enforcement, and on the other hand, also stakeholder involvement. So I'm very happy that we have two Interreg Europe projects here that have been working in these areas, and I would like to give the word to Gerard Bota to speak to us about linking biodiversity data and conservation decision-making processes from the BIDREX project. So please, Gerard, the word is yours.
Good morning. Did you see my slides now? Hello?
Yes, we do. It was great already.
Okay. So thank you very much for inviting me to talk about BIDREX project in representation of all the partners of the project. And I will talk about how linking biodiversity data and information to conservation decision-making processes. So as we have been talking in the previous talks, we have great challenges in terms of biodiversity conservation. So we are in a process of loss of biodiversity and ecosystem services in the world context, of course, also in the EU context. But the other way, in the context of information, there is an increasing of biodiversity information. We have a lot of information, despite we still have gaps in some species or groups or other topics, but there is an obviously increasing data about biodiversity. But the challenge is that this data now comes from multiple sources, from research centers. There is an increase of citizen science that is generating a huge amount of data, and all this information, at difference as 20 or 30 years ago or less, there is no directly controlled, or there is no under the regional government scope. So, and most of the times, this different information is not really interconnected. So from the point of view of the regional governments, there is the context that, of course, regional governments, they have the commitment with a sustainable and development and biodiversity conservation in the implementation of the regional policies. We have a common duty to be more efficient on how we spend the funds, and we need the society asks us to take good decisions. And of course, there is an increase in social and legal requirements in order to halt biodiversity. An example is the EU Biodiversity Strategy, that it's very ambitious, and it's probably one of the most ambitious strategy in the worldwide. So in these two contexts, when we prepared the project, we saw that there is a gap. We want to solve the challenge to reduce the gap between the biodiversity information, that the ones that generate information, to the decision makers, that in this case we're working with regional governments. So the objective of our project was to improve the use of biodiversity information and increase the impact of regional development policies for preservation for the European natural heritage by providing decision-making process with good information. So now I will try to synthesize the main key message. As you know, Interreg Europe, the cornerstone of Interreg Europe project is sharing experiences among regions. So I will try to synthesize in very few minutes the key message that we get. Sorry, I forgot to mention that the BIDREX project was done in 7 different regions across Europe and 9 partners, and they were also regional administrations and scientists, research institutions. So some of the key message that we have been discussing is that understanding the users' needs, in this case the decision makers, is the crucial first step to deliver a useful and impactful data information. It seems quite obvious, but it's not. We have seen that it's not always so obvious for example, for researchers, that we are generating information, but perhaps this information is not linked to the needs of the decision makers. Another key point on that is that the regional governments, the users of this information, they have to give feedback to the data providers and try to explain how this information has been used and which decision has been done with this information. And because it has to be a double sense flow of information. So the data providers needs to know how this information has been used and which decision has been taken with that information. So at the end, one of the key points is developing an environment of mutual trust between data providers and users to succeed. And good example with that, it's the case of biodiversity information flow in the Basque Country. And this is one of the good practice that we have identified in our project that is focused into three aspects: data, the data, of course, but also relationships between stakeholders and also people. So one of the things that they have done in Basque Country is unify standards, criteria, and tools to incorporate in the specifications of the public contract, so everybody knows what they have to deliver to the regional administration. They work very closely with data providers using leading entities to organize and coordinate local groups and to train volunteers in the collection of primary data in the case of citizen science. So the government invests in this kind of training because it's something that at the end they will represent also benefit for the regional government because the data, the quality of the data will be better. They take very care about make visibly the work of all partners. So they recognize very explicitly the role of each of the partners that are data providing and the decisions. Promote and improve sectoral forums that involve key stakeholders. Forums they can discuss, they can join different groups from different data providers, and I think it is a very successful also issue. And at the end, improve the skills of give tools to stakeholders in relation to promotion, management, or use the biodiversity information. So another key messages that we take from our project is that raw data is normally not useful for decision-making process. We need to translate to information to knowledge. We have to normally for decision making, the person who takes the decision, raw data is not useful. They need some kind of digestion. So we need to look for some products that are quite close, are very close to the decision and the questions that the decision maker asks. So it's not useful to send a huge database with a lot of records because decision maker, they will be not useful to take the decision. So we have to look for products that they are very close to the decision. And to support decision-making processes, information should be directly and accessible and very useful, very easy to use. And for example, another good practice that we have identified in our project, it was the Norfolk Biodiversity Information Service, what they call a one-stop shop for biodiversity data information. So it's a place, it's a web page, a server, where everything is there. Is every municipalities, regional government entities, they can go and take the information. So it's a single source of environmental information for Norfolk. It's a region in the UK. So does it mean that it's the reference? You have a reference where you will find information. And in this context, this data inside the system is validated and evaluated. So the users can trust on the information because there is this process of validation and evaluation. Another important thing is that they identify the gaps of knowledge. And this is why this is important, because they give you information about the uncertainty. So when you take a decision, it's important to know not only what you know, but also what you don't know, to know in which term how big is your uncertainty when you take any decision in terms of information. So there is a permanent and secure location for the data. So if there is somebody behind curating, taking care about the information. There is an improved flow of data from individual recorders to users, and both at local and national level. So this is important for data providers because they give added value. So this information that is recorded at regional or local level, there's an upgrade at national level. So it's going from the local to the global. So it means that they contribute in a more national project in this case. And of course, it's a quick and easy access interface to use all this information.
2 minutes, please, Gerard.
Okay, yeah, I'm just finishing. So new data, another challenging thing for regional governments, that the new data sources are continually developed and made available. And one of the worrying of the regional technicians of the regional administrations is they cannot catch up all the information it's generating. So because they have a lot of work in the regional government, so looking for the way that this information disappearing can go into the system, it's also a challenging way because they cannot follow most of the time everything is what is producing. Data can have many life. It can be used in different purposes. So the collect one used many times. That doesn't mean that if you have a good structured data, you have the data you collect for one question, but it's good structured, it's put it in a good systems that can be used many times. So the time you spend to recollect and use this data in appropriate way, it will be a good investment for the future. And at the end, it's everything about an adaptive project, so manner of working. So we need to learn about what is working, but we also need to learn what about is not working. And we need, during this, using this mutual complicity between data providers and end users, in this case, decision makers, try to succeed and to improve every day. And that's all I only want to recommend, because it's very short time to show all the message that we get, all the discussion we have around during 5 years of the project. But you can download this technical document that shows the main results and recommendations, and you will find a lot of more information about this topic. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Gerard. I don't know, my camera doesn't work at all anymore. So at least I hope that you can hear me. So thank you very much, Gerard, for making your presentation. It's very interesting to see what you're saying. We had Karin saying at the beginning of our webinar, we need communication, communication, communication. And I think you're fulfilling a very important role here in terms of communication. So you think, what do you think is one of the most important points is to translate the data so that it's getting accessible for the policymakers? Is that what you would say?
Yeah, that's a key point. We need to translate data. Data is one thing, but knowledge and information is something else. So what they really need, decision makers, is information and knowledge. So we need to. The data suppliers, I work in a research center, we have to adapt the data and give answers to we need to know what exactly they need and try to translate the data on information, because the people, they have to make decisions, they are very busy always, and they really need very quick answers in a short time. So I think if you can build the flows, information flows between data suppliers and data and decision makers, it's easier when there is a need of information. Everything is know from where it begins and where it comes, the ends at the end of the decision. So, and this is everything. It's about communication, and also recognizing the role. Administration has to recognize the role of data suppliers. So recognize the usefulness of this information, and at the end, it's also explaining how this data is used, because it's something that if I give you I give you my data to take decision, but you are taking bad decisions, probably the next time I will think twice if I give you the information to take decisions. So it's important also to explain how this data is used to the data suppliers in this case.
Well, I think it's a very important point that you're making here in terms of being able to capitalize actually on what has been researched and what data has been collected, and how to bring this actually into the world of policy. In other areas, you would even say how to actually exploit it for a business and so on. So it's very important task that you're fulfilling here, and I think we have to also invest in that. In the research world, this is the valley of death that you have to cross, and here I think there has to be a lot of investment in this area. One last little question I would like to ask you is about volunteers. You have mentioned that in one of your examples. Mm-hmm. So that you're saying that there is standardized ways of collecting information and people want to participate. So the use of volunteers, is that something which you would strongly promote?
Yeah, of course, it's something. It's now on today. Citizen science. It's something that is using for a lot of things in terms of biodiversity. If you see in the yesterday, the State of Nature, they are showing trends of biodiversity of farmland birds that it's based on a lot of volunteers across Europe that we go several times counting birds on the field. So citizen science is one of the huge amount of data are coming nowadays from biodiversity from citizen science. So try the regional government invest in this kind of projects, training volunteers. It will be an investment because the quality of the data that the government will receive, the regional government will be better. So it's one of the things, and it's something that's going to be, and it also has a double effect because people is involved on getting data, also is involved on nature conservation, on biodiversity conservation. So volunteers in the scope of citizen science is something that it's increasing a lot, and it will be here for the next decades for sure. Sorry? I don't listen anything. I don't know if.
Hi, Gerard, this is Lotte. Astrid, can you still hear us?
She's not.
Astrid?
Yeah.
Let's just have a look. Well, Astrid can still hear us, but we don't hear her. Well, Astrid, in this case, I suggest that we move on with Wim's presentation, and in the meantime, you try and reconnect to see if we can solve this.
Thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you, Gerard. Thank you very much. So with this, Wim, we would like to ask you to come online. I will send you the rights to share your presentation. I will do that for you. Let's go here. I will open the presentation for you. Can you see it well, Wim?
Yes. Good morning.
Great.
Thank you. Can you see me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, organizers, for the opportunity to share on our experiences in the BIOGOV project. It stands for Biodiversity Governance. Our presentation has about 8 slides, and we developed it jointly by the partnership. In our weekly Skype calls, we are still connected. We have started 2 years ago, and we are finalizing phase 1. My background is in organic farming, so I was happy to see in Karin's presentation that there is more attention also for organic farming and the role of organic farming for improving biodiversity. My professional position is that I'm the lead partner for the province of Fryslân, which is a regional authority in the northern part of the Netherlands, and we are implementing this Interreg project. Next slide, please. So I found this cartoon quite interesting. Actually, it's 2 cartoons on the state that we are currently in. We are faced with the COVID-19 crisis, and we are told to wash our hands and stay well, but we are only vaguely aware of the other crises that are beyond or following this crisis of COVID-19. The recession, the climate change, and also the biodiversity collapse. So this cartoonist from Canada is clearly seeing also the image that Karin showed, that the biodiversity and the SDGs are within the building on the ecosystem boundaries. So if we are faced with the biodiversity collapse, we are quite facing a challenge for the future on our planet. And on the left side, you see that a study has been also implemented on what it means for our personal health. Also Karin linked to that, but increasingly we are disconnected from nature, but also if the nature is showing fewer biodiversity species, this will mean that we will have more allergies and asthma and other kinds of diseases, apart from, say, the zoonotic diseases that might also increase. So this health link is also an important aspect to be aware of, and I think in the future, the coming decade, this will be become more important. But how to address this challenge? So we have in the Interreg project BIOGOV, next slide please. We have a partnership of eight countries. Can you put yes? And this is the habitats in which they are operating. So if I start from the northern part, we have partners in Götaland in southern Sweden, a landscape with lakes and hills and natural meadows and old trees. And then clockwise, if we go at 1 o'clock, we see a traditional orchard landscape in Locki region in Poland, where the traditional trees are diminishing and also the biodiversity linked to that. In Romania, we have the natural meadows between Natura 2000 areas connecting Natura 2000. And then on the bottom right, we have in Bulgaria a partner working on protected areas in Natura 2000. In the middle, we have Slovenia with forestry. Some bear population is still there. In Galicia, we have a partner, and this is the Iberian wolf. And then on the left side, we have in Belgium a project on 2 locations, and one is dealing with the dormouse, a specific species. And in the northern part of the Netherlands, we are dealing with arable land and dairy land, and in the arable land we have the so this is the habitats that we've been working with over the past 2 years. And what we have done is to follow the principles of multi-stakeholder partnerships to form regional stakeholder groups. So these 2 abbreviations you will see in the other slides as well. So RSG stands for regional stakeholder groups, and multi-stakeholder partnerships is a way of analyzing how we can facilitate joint stakeholder cooperation. And there are 7 principles listed there, and it's also part of I don't know if you see it in the mirror, but I can share the link also. It's a whole elaborated methodology on facilitating stakeholder partnerships. But these 7 principles are guiding our work, and this is, say, the framework also for communicating how are we progressing towards biodiversity conservation. And then in these 2 phases of the Interreg project, we have phase 1, working towards action plans, and we are now finalizing this phase 1 by October. And phase 2 is then to implement the action plans. Next slide, please. And in these action plans, you can see the same countries listed. And again, if we go from Sweden clockwise round, in the action plan from Sweden, there are, from the local experiences, proposals for implementing this multi-stakeholder partnership at national level through the policy called SEPA, that's the environmental policy. So the regional stakeholder group will function according to those 7 principles. And one of the tools they are developing is a digital story map for green infrastructure. And they will also focus on the importance of public roadsides as part of the green infrastructure. The action plan from Poland is to include biodiversity in regional strategy. This is Locki region in Poland. And from the peer review exchanges, they have proposed a landscape audit as a tool for biodiversity protection. They want to include in the policy to plant new traditional orchards, so orchards with the traditional tree species, and they will also establish an information center on traditional orchards. In Romania, there is a new policy being developed on ecological corridors between protected areas, and the partner organization, the regional authority, is member of the thematic working group to define this national legislation, a new legislation. In addition to that, they also develop compensatory schemes for landowners to conserve these corridors. In Bulgaria, the action plan focuses on the stakeholder group to be also member of the thematic working group and to co-define the management plans for the protected areas. And a specific aspect is there also to develop criteria for environmental excellence for businesses operating in protected areas. In Slovenia, the plan for the next 2 years is mainly to get more capacities in participatory planning, so involving the stakeholders, and to have more attention for biodiversity in the forest management plans, the forest management approach, and practically also to have more emphasis on where the recreational parks can be so that they are not affecting the biodiversity hotspots or the biodiversity zones. In Spain, in Galicia, the autonomous government is focusing on developing a territorial model on green infrastructure through a database, and that the landowners and that they join collectively to make a plan on how they will conserve green infrastructure elements. This can be along riversides or buffer zones next to Natura 2000. And that they will jointly develop as a plan. And they will also have biodiversity campaigns for young people. In Belgium, the action plan focuses on change of legislation to have a specific tool called compensation for services of farmers to be a part in the legislation. So that is already achieved in the first 2 years. They developed for the River Schelde also a policy note on biodiversity. And similarly to Netherlands and Sweden, also here, the regional stakeholder group will follow the MSP principles in a specific area to develop a landscape park with farmers. And practically, they want to experiment with a tool called results-based payments for landowners to conserve biodiversity. And lastly, in the Netherlands, the stakeholder group will also follow the MSP principles to advocate for more biodiversity. There will be a specific policy tool implemented, which is part of our policy instrument address. And together with Sweden, we also want to do a digital story map to engage the local citizens and stakeholders. Next slide, please.
Wim, you have 2 minutes, please.
Oh, this quickly then, this is what we learned from each other. I understand the PowerPoints will also be available, so you can look at it. From peer review exchanges, we have learned practical good practices. Next slide, please. This is an example from the Swedish digital story map, how they will define the tool for the stakeholder group. So you can see it focuses on green infrastructure and ecosystem services in the area. And then it's an interactive tool where stakeholders can also add information. And on the left bottom side, you see a slide that includes connectivity between different trees which have specific biodiversity values, for example, insects. Next slide, please. Some lessons, so some quotes and some lessons to finalize. So even bringing stakeholders together is already a great achievement. This is part from our joint analysis and exchange. So bringing different perspectives together is already quite a challenge to do, and if that achieves, then it's quite an achievement. And there was also the question, where does policy change start? Does it start from the local level or from the national level? And as a MSP or as a facilitator, you don't choose, but it's the interaction where the policy changes start, where the dynamics are. And the third quote from the partnership is that we see good examples at a local level, but then we often get stuck at higher levels because of all the procedures. And so then we have to deal more with the systemic issues of transformative change that Karin also referred to, and leadership. Where are the politicians who want to take leadership to look beyond the 4-year horizon? So we need to revisit the theory of change there and make new ways of addressing the situation. Next slide, please. I think this is my last slide. So the recommendations on governments is, if you want to engage in policy improvement, it's a complicated process of balancing between different actors, interests, needs, perspectives. So your facilitation skills, or in some cases they have hired an external facilitator. That is key, to have the facilitation on well in order, or to develop that. In terms of stakeholder dynamics, the second point is that building trust is what we learned is the most important start. If you have the trust of the stakeholders, then you can keep the focus and bridge between the multiple arenas. We also learned that Interreg Europe has inspires good practices, but not so much in policy change, because the local realities are very strong, and so you have to build your case locally. And the last lesson or recommendation is that political reality and administrative procedures at local level determine policy change. So it's important to build alliances, and this is at the heart of the MSP process. Because the quote is also, if you're not at a table, then you're on the menu. So you have to find a way of being heard as a stakeholder, being seen. I think this is the last slide. Next slide, please.
Yeah, I hope it is the last slide. Thank you very much, Wim, for your presentation.
A perspective from space on our area. Bye. Thank you.
No, but it's a very nice perspective on your area. I've admired it already. I would like to have a picture like this also for my area. That would be great. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. You have underlined once again how important it is to bring the different stakeholders together. It's a key not only for the area of biodiversity and nature conservation, but also for many of the other areas that we are tackling. And this is a question we're being asked very often, how to organize that, how to address that. So it is a real pleasure to hear that you have so many good examples that you can share here from the project and approaches. So with this, I would like to give the word a little bit to our panelists. Maybe you can all turn on your camera again, our speakers. Apart from me, everybody should be able to do that. And I wanted to ask Karin and Erik, if you could give a little bit of feedback on what you've heard from the two projects. What do you think? How they're doing? How they have been progressing in their areas? Maybe Karin, I can start with you.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thanks also for these very interesting presentations. I certainly learned a lot. I really liked the BIOGOV examples on how to build your case and how to really get all people involved. And on the question of what is actually bottom up or top down, I think the answer is really we need both. If we want to have this transformative change I was speaking a lot on, I think we really need both. I mean, it is kind of sandwich model. So if you push from the bottom and you have leadership from above, then you probably come to a switching where you really make you make a big change, and this big change which we need. And we have to communicate that this is actually good for us. If we stay frozen, thinking until we know the last detail, it will be too late. I really also like this the graphics that was shown, the caricature. I'd seen it before, but it says so much more than actually all assessments combined. I mean, we really need to come, to acknowledge the situation we are in. And here, coming to the presentation of Gerard, I really admire our knowledge, and our knowledge is increased, but then I always look also at the policymaker side also needs to be an acceptance. And very often, I mean, the knowledge in particular over the last 2 years, we have seen so many assessments, it's really kind of put in front of, I mean, on the plate in summary for policymakers, but then because of the busy people, how many people then actually read this? So again, we probably need also to involve more, I mean, of the really skilled communicators to do that. The knowledge alone, but of course we need the knowledge. Without the knowledge, we are completely lost. Without the knowledge, we kind of move in like blind and deaf. So, but if also the knowledge alone, I mean, this is now after, I mean, more than 10 years in a policy DGs and coming from the science field, I still have sometimes a big frustration to see we know so much. I mean, we know what needs to be done and we have the means, and still, what does it take? And I mean, a lot is probably the, I mean, creating this movement, this mobilization from bottom up, and here the governance on, I mean, on multi-level governance really is absolutely key. So thanks a lot for this insight, and I surely will dive in a bit more in the respective projects. Thanks a lot.
Very good. Erik, also, would you like to give some feedback before we give back the word to Wim and Gerard to reply?
Yes, I think I just wanted to say that both presentations are very inspiring, and I would like to know more about it. But I think on the data, I think the picture is quite diverse where you are. I think there are many regions where basic data is still very poor. So it's not only about accessibility, but also really investing in getting core data we need to meet agreed objectives. I think it's and then yeah, it's very fascinating that I mean, there's all these new types of data of citizen science and you know, identification apps on phones. It's going very fast. So I think it's really great if you can find new ways to make that more useful in different contexts. So I think it's very important work, and I also really like the governance part. I mean, there's so many examples. I mean, many are related to green infrastructure solutions with land managers. It's something we've worked on a lot as well, and also on the results-based payments that were mentioned. I think from our experience in the last 3 years, also implementing the EU Action Plan for Nature, People and the Economy, we found that actually there's been a lot of improvement in many countries and regions in terms of stakeholder management, also in the implementation of Natura 2000. Well, in the past, that was certainly not the case. So I think in the recent years, in many places, there are really good recent examples that are really worth presenting better in across Europe and in other regions. So I would really encourage Interreg Europe to continue this important work, because there's actually in terms of stakeholder management, it's really going in the right direction, but it needs to be better shared and scaled up. Yeah. So.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of communication to be done, as we hear from everybody, and maybe there's also some work to be done in the terms of research on data. So very important issue as well. So maybe Horizon 2020 wants to invest, or Horizon in the future wants to invest a little bit more on that. So Gerard and Wim, can I ask you to reply a little bit?
Mm-hmm. I just want to mention 2 things about the research at the gap. One of the things, I'm coming from the research world, but I'm very close to the regional administrations in terms of decision-making process. But the problem is that a lot of time in the research career is not valued this way to get closer to administration. So they only know how many papers you have published, which is the impact of your papers and everything. So that's something we need to change also in research, because at the end, if you are researching on conservation, we want that these results has been implied. I always put the example of medicine. If we have biomedicine studying about how to save COVID, but there is nobody giving the pill to the doctor, it's a problem. The doctor, they don't really need, the doctor in a small village, they don't really need how is this pill, which is the content, and there needs somebody goes to the doctor, say, okay, if you find a person with these symptoms, you have to give this pill 4 times a day. So that's what we need. So we need something to translate everything. We need people, probably, that it would be in both sides, in interface between research and regional government, trying to make this link, because regional governments and technicians from the regional governments, they cannot follow research. As a researcher, they cannot follow everything. It's going out every week, every day. So we need this kind of integration and interface of translation. Yeah. And the other thing that it's in relation to Erik red message that we really focus up also in the project is that we still need more information about biodiversity, but one of the things that most of the regions they don't have is about effectiveness of measures. So we are focused on monitoring how is every biodiversity, how is groups knowing what we have, but we are spending money on projects, on management. We don't have at limited money to spend in everything, so we need to be very efficient, and we don't really have trustable information in most of cases about the effectiveness of our investment. So another key point that we need to focus is on monitoring effectiveness, because it's not something that it's a waste of money. It's an investment, because at the end, in the next project, the same money will be invested in a better way. So you will get more efficiency on. So I always say that monitoring, managing actions is not an investment. Is not something you have to pay. I don't know the name in English. It's an investment for the future.
It's not a loss.
Because you will. Yeah, it's not. But thank you, Astrid. So, and I think it's very important on that, because if not, we are not knowing if even the limited funds that we have with conservation we are spending in a good way.
Well, and every politician will want to know how effective the measures are. So it's a very important thing to have. So it's not a loss. It's a good investment for the benefit of all of us. So Wim, maybe you also want to come back?
Yes, thank you. From the presentations of the other panelists, also for the citizen science is really something exciting. Also in terms of stakeholder involvement and involving the public, like Gerard is referring to. There are interesting also developments on this, how to see this as it's called science, so also to use this as a basis for validation and impact assessment. So in the bird sector, the habitat, and we also here in the Netherlands, it's a huge community who are connected to the local. So that I want to also support. From Erik's presentation, I was happy to see that in the multi-year financial framework, there is also for the green infrastructure this amount of budget available. I don't know if it's only for the urban area, because we are also dealing it from the rural area. Of course, then there's also an overlap with the CAP and the greening of the CAP and all that discussion, but it's good to see that this is there. And like I said, also the transformative change, I mean, the vocabulary is now also in the EU and in the thinking, but how to operationalize this. I think this experience or this framework of multi-stakeholder partnerships and how to facilitate, there's a lot of experience globally also on how to do this and to keep your process going so that every stakeholder is heard and being part of the decision-making process. So this is hopefully something that will come into the next decade. And then practically we are just starting 2 years, and next year we have October, we have a policy event in Brussels in our plans. So I hope we can keep this connection also between at least the people who are on this panel, but also who are listening to the panel, so that we can engage them also for the further exchange of information and keeping and inspiring each other, so that we make because the waves I think are quite strong, and so we don't have a lot of time waste. But we need the connections also personally, and so I hope we can invite you to next year's event in Brussels also.
Thank you very much. Also, Wim, yes, it almost sounded like closing words already, but I still want to give the chance to our 4 panelists to give us a short remark for the regions, for the many regions that are participating today. 80% we've said. So what they to just give them some encouraging words, final closing words. So I start again with Karin.
I will be very short. My encouragement is really get started, get into implementation, learn by doing, explain, communicate, but get started. I mean, my dearest, my major concern really is the time, the timing issue. We are running out of time. So it's important. The best plan in 10 years' time will be useless. So we really need to act according to the knowledge we have now while still improving our knowledge. But it's so important to scale up, step up implementation, use all the facilities, opportunities, funding streams at hand. Thank you.
I would like to echo that, and I just want to recall, I think, the point that there are a lot of successful stories. So we do not have to reinvent the wheel. So that's maybe an optimistic message, not to be too afraid of all these big waves coming towards us, but we just scale those successes up because we've done it before for several decades at too small scale. And that with European regional policy, you have a really big and flexible tool to use it to your local needs. But you need to be proactive in getting it in the programs and make sure that you evaluate it and invest in actual projects quickly, because otherwise the funding period runs out and then you're like, oh, we could have done more. So I totally agree with Karin. Act now and get those measures programmed and implemented and use the money that is there.
Thank you, Erik. Gerard, your final
one
message.
of the main, well, all regional administrations, they always say that if they have good information, it's very helpful to take decisions. So this is nobody says that it's not needed the information to take decision, and as better as they have, it's easier to take the decision. So that's one of the key points. So at this point, I would like to say, try to identify which are the key actors in your region, try to build bridges between you and regional administration and these key actors of the information, and make this trust between partners, and recognize a lot of times it's very important to recognize the role of the data suppliers on the decisions. So give the feedback from the regional administration to the data suppliers to know that they form part of something bigger, that it's the conservation. So try to give feedbacks, always thinking on giving feedbacks to the data providers.
Yeah, not to forget, very important point. Thank you very much. And Wim, the final word is really yours, almost. Then it's me again.
Well, my final word would be that at regional authority level, I hope we can get more courageous policymakers who are taking a longer time horizon, not only the election period of 4 years, because this is really, we need longer time horizons. And secondly, that we have to make the connections. So make connections between inspiring examples like Erik is saying, and people who are, a coalition of the willing is often called. And don't waste time in those who don't want to change, but make the change with those who want to change. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think that was some very nice concluding words from all of you. I would like to thank our panelists for all their inspiring speeches, and also for the many handouts and examples that they have been sharing. We will make them available again, not only now in the chat, but also in our follow-up article, where you can find all the presentations and all of these to download. And With this, I would also again let you know that we have the possibility, that you have the possibility to come towards the Interreg Europe policy learning platform with your questions, with your thoughts. We have many services from the help desk through to peer reviews which you can use. And with this, I would like to say thank you and ask Lotte to run a little video on our services. And I would like to say goodbye and hope to see you next time, and certainly in October next year when BIOGOV is having its final conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And I'm sorry you couldn't see me. My camera has died on me. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hello, I'm Raluca. I work for the Policy Learning Platform, and I would like to talk to you today about one of our services, the Policy Help Desk. If you work for a public institution and are involved in the development of regional policies, you might be facing a particular moment because you have to look into the future and build the next generation of operational programs. Our Policy Help Desk is easy to use. It can bring you concrete solutions to your questions related to research and innovation, SMEs competitiveness, low carbon economy, environment and resource efficiency. And it basically functions as if you were talking with a colleague, with a virtual colleague to whom you go to for help. But let's see how it works more concretely. All you have to do is to visit our website and write to us about your particular challenge. There is a designated form for that. Once we receive your request, we work with our network of experts located all over Europe. Depending on the subject of your request, we will send it to one of our experts. They will look into it, analyze it carefully, and then they will come back to you with an email. In this email, you will have personalized guidance from all over Europe in the form of recommended readings and policy briefs, videos and webinars, good practices, contacts of people that you might want to talk to. So, if you don't know where to start when thinking about the future and particular policy challenges that you are facing, don't hesitate to test our Policy Help Desk. We are here to help you.